This is Talkin to America. I'm your host, Aaron Zellman. Our subject today is the law. We're talking to Richard Stevens, lawyer and author, a longtime contributor of articles and materials for books, booklets, and films about freedom, government, civilian disarmament, and the Bill of Rights. Richard, some people say that Americans need to clean house in Congress. They say that America can return to a free, non-socialist, prosperous country if we just elect the right people to the House and Senate. Other people say that the real problem is the kinds of laws and the numbers of laws that we have. So my question to you is, what do you think is most dangerous to the American way of life and our liberty? The elected officials in the legislature or the laws themselves?
Well, Aaron, I think that both are dangerous, but the laws are the more dangerous of the two.
Well, it's interesting because, we both know people who believe that we should just enforce the laws. I guess the question is, why would they say that, and what do you think about that?
Well, I think that the laws can be the most dangerous thing. Once a law is enacted, at least in our system, once a law is enacted, it usually remains on the books permanently. So, a congressman or senator or president can go back to private life, retire, pass away, but the law remains in effect. And that's the same, by the way, for judicial decisions. Once a judge has made a decision or a court of appeals, Supreme Court has made a decision, those rulings exist forever, way past the lifetime of the judge. Unless somebody does something about them, they're going to remain there as the law. So when you have laws that reduce liberty or infringe on our rights or raise taxes or affect the economy in a negative way, laws that damage our ability to defend ourselves either as a nation or as people, then that law is going to continue to do that damage forever. And that's going to go on until it's changed to repeal. There's another element of it. It's not just the law itself, but it's also the effect of this whole system of laws in a country. The system of laws is like an educational system. Every law, statute, regulation, ruling, etc. is part of that system. And we might refer to the whole system as the law, the law meaning the whole system. Well, the law creates an environment. It creates the environment we all are raised in. It trains people to think in a certain way. Since we're kids, we know the law says you can't do this, the law says you can't do that. Well, if the law upholds natural rights, if it upholds freedom, if it upholds a free market economy, things like that, then that's one kind of environment, and that happens to be the one America used to have. But if the law tends to give people opportunities to get tax money for their pet projects out of the government, if that's the way the law tends to operate, then that's a different kind of environment. And as the law goes, it teaches the people what kind of situation we live in. And the third thing that's really important about the way the law operates, I think, is that the law, the whole system of laws and regulations and everything, becomes the guidebook. It becomes, as though we're in stone, and all the bureaucrats and government employees and judges and everybody else thinks that's where the power is, and the government employees just routinely and mechanically apply the law. We've all been in a line, whether it's a Department of Motor Vehicles or BATF or someplace else, and somebody will tell us, well, I don't make the rules, I just follow them. Well, that's the motto of government employees, and that's what the law does. It creates an environment that people feel they can't get outside of, and they can't use any reason outside of. It's just the way things go. So if the system of laws, which we can refer to as the law, hurts people, harms liberty, then so be it. The government agents and the bureaucrats are going to carry out that law, whether it's good or bad, and whether or not the current Congress even supports it.
It's a frightening situation. Well, I guess some of our listeners would like to know if you give some examples of how the law rules us more than the lawmakers.
There's one that almost every American knows, and it's good that we know it, but it gives you a sense of how powerful the law is as an educational tool. And that is that people are presumed innocent until proved guilty in our legal system. Little kids even know that, in grade school and high school. And if you're a parent, you may have had conversations like that with a teenager who says, you can't prove it, I'm still innocent. But the fact is that principle of presumption of innocence controls not only the way criminal trials operate, but it has an effect on the way we think in private life. And similarly, one that everybody knows, certainly everybody over age 18, and that's the idea that the homeowner can deduct mortgage interest on their federal taxes. We say mortgage interest is deductible. And we walk around as though that came off of Mount Sinai. And, mortgage interest is deductible. And you can hardly even discuss a new or revised tax program in this country, whether it's fair tax, flat tax, or any other change. You can't really mention those things without coming up against somebody saying, yeah, but mortgage interest is deductible, right? And people just believe that as a fact. So that mortgage interest is deductible clause, for example, just one part of a huge federal tax code, has become something that everybody believes is true, and it will continue to affect us long after the original legislators and the judges and everybody who initially put it together, long after they're dead and gone.
How about some other examples from world history that you could share?
Well, in America, and if you look at between America and Mexico, for example, and those of us who live in the Southwest are more conscious of this than others. But if in America, as I was mentioning before, you're presumed innocent until you're proved guilty. But in Mexico, they don't have that presumption. In fact, the way it operates, it's as though you're presumed guilty until you prove yourself innocent. Well, that's a way, way different system. And that's why Americans who go down to Mexico and get into trouble end up in jail for long periods of time before trial, and it's really hard to understand why why it's so easy to get convicted down there. And that's one of the reasons, one of the ways that you can see differences in play. But there are lots worse examples than just that one. For example, in America, we have a notion, I think, that our law says, well, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt somebody else or you don't violate laws. You can do what you want. It's kind of what we call freedom. And that's a spirit in America, even though I think we're losing it in a lot of ways. But in America, you can look at the written laws, and you can figure out what's prohibited and what isn't, and what the penalties are for violating the law. Pretty darn well. It's not perfect, but it's pretty accurate. You can actually look up the law that you're about to break if you really want to do it. But let's turn to Nazi Germany as a perfect example. There's lots of them, but it's one that people know well. In Nazi Germany, the law, the legal system was different. There, the written laws didn't explain everything about the law. They were just guidelines. The written laws were guidelines. This is hard to imagine for Americans. But in Nazi Germany, the judge could convict you of violating the spirit of a law, not the written words. But if you did something that seemed to violate the idea of the law, you could be punished. And not only that, but the written down penalties in the Nazi law were viewed as minimums, not maximums. And, in the United States we say, punishable by 5 years, up to 5 years in prison, things like that. Well, Nazi laws had things like that. But the way their system worked, the judges were encouraged to go beyond the number in the statute. Well, that gives you a sense of how the way the legal philosophy and the way the law operates can have a vast effect and a horrific effect. And of course, in Nazi Germany, they maximized penalties against Jews and against gun owners and against other enemies of the state. And it went far beyond whatever the German legislation said. It went on all the way to the Holocaust.
There's a lot of information here. Are there any books or resources that you suggest people use to have a better understanding of what you're saying? Sure.
There's a little book. I know you've read this, I've read this, and many of the people you and I know have read, and I recommend it to everyone in America. It's a little book. It's called The Law, and it's the meaning of the law is the same as we've been using it in this conversation, and that's written by a fellow named Frederick Bastiat, Bastiat. I think it's pronounced Bastiat in French, but that doesn't matter.